weeks. Glenn, we appreciate your time. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Hey guys, good morning. I was just getting off our Michigan site's message board. It's a
Oh,
great,
what's that like?
it's a great time to join the Go 24/7 community. You can read every single message board in the college football world, and it's crazy over there right now. It's really an interesting time.
I mean, this is what message boards are made for.
Oh my
This is
gosh.
perfect.
Yeah. Oh God, yes, yeah, absolutely.
I have these text messages. I saw this. My uncle knows. Like, it's a wild time.
I love the uncle. I
Yeah.
love the uncle message.
Was there something that stood out specifically from the Michigan message board that caught your eye?
It's just the craziness of the whole situation. I think of how quickly that went down, and there had been apparently some rumors of this going on, but when it was all put out in the open yesterday, certainly Michigan fans were, the first to start running towards, some of their big name coaches that they want to see at Michigan, and just kind of the ripple effect that could create across college football with the different options that are available there. That's the most interesting part to me. It's kind of not necessarily who takes on the Michigan job, but just what ripple effect that might take depending on who that coach is.
And so I'll ask you, because we talked about the ripple effect a little bit this morning, and how it kind of pertains to LSU, because there are a few connections maybe to LSU. I think one that some people thought about is maybe Brian Kelly gets hired at Michigan, but the two more prominent
Somebody help.
the two more prominent connections to LSU that I want to ask you about are Kalen DeBoer's name has come up a lot around the Michigan job, which will then open up Alabama. And obviously everyone's favorite jab is to say, oh, well, now Lane Kiffin's going to leave LSU at the altar for Bama. And then ultimately Bryce Underwood, former LSU commit, is at Michigan, and maybe some question marks around his future there.
Yeah, look, I think the DeBoer stuff is certainly going to be something that is kicked around at Michigan. Like, I think that just watching and reading a lot of the pieces that our guys up there are writing right now, that certainly appears to be one of the preferred candidates, which you're right could create some of that ripple effect there if the Alabama job does come open. I would be shocked if the Lane Kiffin stuff with Alabama has any merit to it. I mean, I don't think that would just. It's kind of so hard to believe that it's hard to wrap my mind around at the same time. Like, just the guy going from Ole Miss to LSU and LSU to Alabama. Like, I just don't see there's any way that happens. And so, as far as the Bryce Underwood stuff, though, like I do think that he's a quarterback. And look, Kiffin is the ultimate troll, right? I guess when it comes to social media, and I'm still getting used to the idea of covering a coach that has such a strong social media presence. And so you look at your phone last night and you see the Bryce Underwood, or the tweet at, I guess, Dave Portnoy, and it's referencing to Bryce Underwood about coming to LSU and things of that nature. Like, I think LSU would kick the tires there if there was anything to do with that. But look, I do think that Underwood at the same time is getting paid $3 million a year to be at Michigan right now, and coming off the season that he just had at Michigan, I don't think there's any team that would pay him that kind of cash to come out of the transfer portal. So, I think for him, unless he really wants to put development first and put development as like his key part of this college experience over the next couple of years, I would imagine Michigan holds on to him as well, and they go out there and find an offensive-minded head coach and try to develop him quickly, because he's got a lot of talent, and I still believe that. But you certainly watched last year, and it didn't seem like he maximized it, or Michigan maximized it his first year in college.
And speaking of the quarterback position and Lane Kiffin, we obviously are looking forward to the transfer portal, which opens up in a handful of weeks. I think January 2nd through the 16th is when it'll open up, and that's got to be task number one right on that list, is go find your quarterback. Sam Levitt's name has popped up a few times. Now the Bryce Underwood question marks and mess around there, and obviously Trinidad Chambliss, Austin Simmons, their names have popped up around the potential future quarterback at LSU. Is there anything you are hearing, or maybe just kind of expecting, when it comes to the portal and the quarterback position for Lane Kiffin?
I think they're going to have to go out and grab at least two. I really do. I think, look, the Michael Van Buren is really the only quarterback on this roster that you could realistically see back in purple and gold next year. And I think just watching these last several games with him under center, it's pretty clear that he still needs some development to get to a place where he can be a winning conference quarterback. So I think LSU, you got to go out and you've got to find a short-term answer, and then you got to find maybe a longer-term answer too, which is going to cost, and it's going to be you're going to have to put up a lot of money for it. I think Leavitt's name out of Arizona State is one you're going to continue to hear until the transfer portal opens on January 2nd. Interesting thing about him is he's got that Lisfranc injury that he's going to be coming off of, and that's something that he tried to play through for a little bit and apparently made worse. And those are injuries that are just really, really hard to know just how mobile you'll come back and how quickly you can come back, because there's just not a whole lot of blood flow that goes down to that part of the foot and that part of your body. So he's looking at a 5 to 6 month recovery time from everything that I've seen and read. So that's interesting because if you take all that into account, you're talking about a quarterback who, if you take from the portal, could miss a lot of the spring, could miss some key portions of your offseason there. And so, but I do think he's immensely talented. I think LSU, if they have the right opportunity, that they will try to go after him. I think, to your point, Chambliss, if he gets that extra waiver year, I think that's kind of a coin toss right now to see if he does actually get that waiver season, that extra year. But certainly makes a lot of sense for LSU, for Lane Kiffin and LSU to go, attack him in the portal if that's an option. So there's a lot of different areas that I think LSU can go at quarterback, but I think you got to start by finding a short-term answer, a guy that can help you in 2026 to get things back on pace for an offense, for the LSU offense, and then maybe finding a younger player that has maybe a little bit of experience, but hasn't really quite developed yet in the way that he hoped, and that you can kind of convince to say, hey, if you come here and you develop for a year, you have an opportunity to come compete for the starting job in 2027. Somebody like that, I think would make a lot of sense for as a second quarterback take out of the portal.
And speaking of the portal, LSU has had a handful of portal entries, that said they plan to enter the portal. But they've had two key contributors over the last couple of days that have announced their plans to enter in Juwan Johnson and Ahmad Bro. What are your takes on those two entries and kind of that situation and kind of where that leaves LSU right now?
Yeah, I think from a short-term perspective, it's interesting because, both of those guys are going to play in the bowl game. Ahmad and Juwan have both said that they're going to play in the bowl game, and I think that's good for them in their future, just to get some extra tape on the film there if they're able to go out there and play well in the Texas Bowl here in a couple weeks. But I think from I guess we can start with Bro. From a defensive line perspective, you have some really great young talent coming in. Obviously, the guys that we've talked about with Lamar Brown, Richard Anderson, Deuce Geralds. You've got some interesting young pieces in Dominic McKinley, who's still developing. You've got Walter Mathis. Zion Williams is a guy that I think is very interesting from a long-term perspective. But, you don't really know on this current roster how many of those players are going to return, because you're still trying to find your next defensive line coach. And I think the same can be said for running backs, right? There's still some up in the air about what's going to happen at those two positions. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if more defensive linemen hop into the portal. I wouldn't be surprised if, Caleb Jackson or maybe even a Caden Durham hop into the portal from a running back perspective. I think that those two position groups right now, they got to figure out who's going to be their coach next year, and then lay out a plan for some of these guys that to convince to return to the program if when those hires are made. So that's kind of my bigger takeaway here is just guys, I don't think we're done seeing portal entries at those two positions, but certainly Ahmad Bro is a guy that was a major solid contributor for you for 2 years. You would have loved to have seen him stay, because I also think he was a pretty good leader, a good locker room presence there. And then Juwan Johnson was just kind of that Swiss Army knife for you in the backfield, and just never felt like they found the right way you utilize him the first couple of years, and I would have been interested to see kind of how Lane Kiffin would utilize a player like that, because I do think he has a lot of athletic ability, a lot of talent, and it would have been interesting to see just kind of how he would adapt to a Lane Kiffin run offense.
And if it feels like you said, never really had a position, but if it does feel like he wants to go play quarterback, where do you think he would end up? What kind of, I guess, competition level would it be for him to be able to try his hand at quarterback? I just say that because of everything he's posted on Twitter. He always says, he's acting like he didn't really get a fair shake at quarterback. He obviously moved to that position at OSU and then it got moved around again. So I just wonder what you think his skill set would be and what type of competition it would be if he played quarterback.
Yeah, I want to be fair to him because,
elite athlete.
We only got to see, he's a great athlete, and we only got to see him for a little bit in, the spring and fall from a quarterback perspective. I think there's a lot of development that needs to happen there with Juwan, and so I'm not sure that, if you're a Power 4 school, you're going to be going out there looking for Juwan Johnson as a quarterback, but, a group of 5 or, maybe a little lower, just go somewhere where you can develop as a quarterback and get some playing experience, and then maybe, in a year or two when you have some good tape and some good experience under your belt, maybe you can try to hop back into the portal and see if there's a bigger school that'll take a chance on you. Like, I just don't see, if he wants to truly play quarterback, what kind of Power 4 opportunities are going to be there for him. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe there's a team out there that does feel like he could be a future quarterback and can develop him in that way. And but I just from what I saw, and you guys are out at the practices too, it looked like he was still trying to figure it out from a college perspective of how to play quarterback.
Because I do think there's a rule that he still has his red shirt. So if you want to take a flyer on him for a year, let him learn the position. That would be the route I see at a bigger school.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that would be something to consider for sure. But there just needs to be more work done there, I think, before he can realistically go on the field for a Power 4 program and help them win games. So, but we'll see. I mean, I like I said, I love the talent. I like the athletic ability, and the all-time leader in Louisiana high school sports in yards. So when you're doing something right there if you're able to do that throughout a 4-year career.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And you brought up the the coaching positions, the running backs coach and the defensive line coach. I want to start at D-line coach. When we talked last week, Elijah Robinson's name was the name. Seemed like that was kind of done in a sense, not officially done, but that was what was going to be happening, and that changed rather quickly. If LSU doesn't get Elijah Robinson, what are some of the other names you're hearing, and where is the current standing with the Elijah Robinson situation?
Yeah, I think we're still kind of in limbo there. Hopefully that decision gets made soon, and if it's LSU, great, and if it's not, you have to pivot quickly if you're Lane Kiffin. And I think, from my perspective here, we haven't heard a whole ton of outside names, in the last couple days since this has happened. But, I think one option could be just to promote Chris Kiffin and make him the defensive line coach. He came over to Oxford with Lane. I think he's somebody that has, several opportunities as a defensive line coach at the NFL level and at the college level. I think most recently he was a defensive line coach with the Houston Texans several years ago. I think he did the same thing for the Cleveland Browns when Myles Garrett was very early in his career. So he's worked with some really good players, worked with some really strong defensive linemen throughout his career, and I think they could do a lot worse than Chris Kiffin if they were just to go out on the open market and just try to bring in somebody just to bring in somebody from the outside. I think that it was good for Kiffin to take the big swing on Robinson, and if you land him, great. But if not, then I do think that Chris Kiffin is a good option for you too if that's what LSU and Lane Kiffin decides to do. I know everybody wants to know about Ed Orgeron. I don't think that at this time is going to be the move that Lane Kiffin makes. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he does decide that he wants some more Louisiana flavor in here to help from a recruiting perspective. But that's a name that I think has certainly cooled. I think in the last several weeks since he took the job, and has gone after guys like Robinson, and certainly I think a lot of the focus also in week 1 was just making sure that he could retain Baker and the majority of this defensive staff, which is I think the most important thing that he's done so far.
And then at the running backs coach position, you quote tweeted it yesterday that Michael Katz put out the term sheets he received over at Ole Miss for Pete Golding, some other coaches, and Kevin Smith was included in that list. Obviously, that is not anything set in stone, but at the current standing with Kevin Smith, what are you hearing? And if he does opt to stay in Oxford, is it just Frank Wilson stays at running backs coach, or is there anything else that maybe happens for LSU?
Yeah, I think I quote tweeted it. It's not nothing. I mean, the term sheet stuff is certainly not binding contract or anything like that, but it's not nothing that, Ole Miss, at least is making a real push to try to keep Kevin Smith, in Oxford here going forward. And, I think that's the big question, right? If he stays, what does Lane Kiffin ultimately decide to do with that position? And I do think that, from a local media perspective, from a local fan base perspective, there are a lot of supporters of Frank Wilson, and certainly at the high school level, when you talk about recruiting and down in the New Orleans area, where you're going to have to go in and get some big time recruits here over the next several years. It just makes all the sense in the world to keep Frank on staff. But, look, Kiffin was paid, money to make these kinds of decisions. And, if he really wanted Frank Wilson to be the running backs coach, that's a decision you feel like would have been announced already. And so maybe he was just holding out to see what happens with Kevin Smith. And if Kevin Smith says no, then, it just makes sense to slide Frank in. But if not, you could start looking elsewhere and start, making a more broader search. And, look, the Michigan job just opened up, and, a lot of those coaches are, on the market right now and probably not knowing what their future is going to hold. Tony Alford's one of the highest paid running backs coaches in the country. He's certainly done a nice job with running backs up in Michigan for a while now. Maybe you make a call there to make it try to get a big splash, but I just think from a Louisiana perspective and a Louisiana recruiting perspective, LSU has one of the best in the business from that perspective. And, I would certainly hate to see Frank Wilson go if Kiffin doesn't get his guy. It's one thing if Kiffin gets his guy and the guy that he trusts and the guy that he thinks can help carry forward, the running back room here under his leadership. But if he doesn't get Kevin Smith, then I do think it's a real conversation that he has to have, or just a real, kind of thought process he needs to go through as to, okay, everybody's telling me about Frank Wilson. I know Frank Wilson a little bit, from a 2009 coaching staff perspective. I've worked with him before. Is this the best move for me to make? And that's really, I think, the decision that will have to be made after that bowl game. And so, we'll see. It sounds like they're still having conversations, which is good. But right now, I'm still kind of on the fence about whether or not Kiffin decides to keep Wilson on staff.
And then last question I have about the staff. Blake Baker, obviously, I think we spoke last Friday. It was announced Friday evening. Blake Baker is returning, opted not to go to Tulane or Memphis, is returning as LSU's defensive coordinator. That feels like a pretty big deal, huh?
Oh, yeah. No, like I just said, I think it's the biggest thing that Lane Kiffin's done here in the first, 2 weeks on the job, is being able to retain this defensive staff for the most part, with Baker, and then, kind of the pieces that align afterwards with Raymond and Jake Olson and Kevin Peoples. Those guys did a tremendous job of getting this defense up to snuff from 2 years ago when it was outside the top 100 in a lot of statistical categories, and making it to a top 25 defense this year. I think the most important part in doing that and being able to retain Baker here in the month of December is now you have really a 3-week period where Blake Baker and Kevin Peoples and all these defensive guys can really get to know Lane Kiffin and his front office guys, and they can really have conversations about the players that they want to attack and the plan that they want to attack in the transfer portal, with making sure that defensive side of the ball doesn't slip. Because let's face it, you're going to be losing a lot of your starters this year. Jack Pyburn, Patrick Payton, Harold Perkins, Monsieur Delane, AJ Halsey. Those are just a couple of the guys that played big-time roles for you this year, and you're going to have to replace all of their production, all of their time on the field. And I think some of that you hope can be done with internal development on the roster if you're able to get guys to stick around. But you're also going to have to go out and find some veteran experience at the Power 4 level. And I think having Baker and having this defensive staff and this nucleus in place is going to really help over the next 3 weeks make a lot of those decisions.
Well, Glenn, we appreciate your time and all your insight as always, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There he is.